Greetings and welcome to our daily walk through the scriptures for June the 6th. Your readings today were in 1 Kings chapter 2 and the first two verses of 1 Kings chapter 3, Acts chapter 5, Psalm 125, 1 through 5, and Proverbs chapter 16, verse 25. There's a lot to talk about. So we'll start with let's start with Psalm. Let's start with Psalm 125. And I just want you to have a visual, and this is an easy thing. When you read that it says a song of ascents, that literally means that they're climbing. You see, Jerusalem, where they were going to the temple of the Lord, Jerusalem was actually up on a mountain, if you will. And so when you read about Song of Ascents, what I want you to picture as you read it is pilgrims, Jewish pilgrims trudging up the hills, up the mountains to go to Jerusalem, okay? And remember, these were public songs of worship. So these would have been songs that people, and possibly dozens of people, as they walked up together, because a lot of times they did this as families, they would all sing this together. And I just want you to picture that, because it's kind of a cool little thing. All right, 1 Kings chapter 2, the chickens have come home to roost. The things that David wasn't willing to do, he gives Solomon charge to do. And guess what Solomon does? He does them. Solomon takes care of all of the things that David had been kind of ticking little boxes on and just remembering, okay, all right, Joab, I remember what you did here. Okay, all right, Shimei, I remember what you did here. And he goes through all these different things. So Solomon comes and he begins his rule, and he's already showing a little bit of wisdom with his brother Adonijah and what his request was. But Solomon kind of cleans house. He cleans things up. Things that David wasn't willing to do, Solomon is. So that kind of shows a little bit of Solomon's character, which is really good. And then chapter 3, verses 1 and 2 have just some things I want to touch on. First of all, it's a little bit of foreshadowing, because we had already read that David wanted to build the temple, and he had all the plans. Remember, he and Nathan had a conversation, and then Nathan said, nope, time out. You're a king of war. I want your son, who's going to be a king of peace, to be the one that builds my temple. So that's going to happen. Verse 2 kind of starts talking about that and starts building the temple of the Lord. But verse 1 is an interesting little statement. It talks about him making an alliance with the Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and marrying the Pharaoh's daughter. This is going to be a bugaboo for Solomon. You're going to find out that Solomon has a lot of wives and a lot of concubines. Solomon allows the flesh to get to him, but Solomon also allows diplomacy to make decisions that he knows are wrong. You see, Solomon knows that he is only supposed to marry Hebrew women. It doesn't matter if he's king. There's a rule for that. And also, not only that, but he should be only marrying once. Yet Solomon finds himself getting trapped up in what it means to be a king. And we're going to see that in the story of Solomon. We're going to see it when it comes to building the temple versus building his palace. We're going to see it in the number of women that he marries. We're going to find all these things out, that it can be very difficult to be in that position of responsibility. All right, Acts chapter 5. There's two things I want to do on this one real quick. First of all, the question you might ask as you read this is, why did God kill Ananias and Sapphira? I mean, it says there that in verse 3, Ananias, and in verse 2, that he gave whatever he gave whatever he wanted to give. He didn't have to put an amount into it. So if Ananias didn't necessarily do anything wrong by giving whatever he felt like, what was the issue? And the issue is this: both Ananias and Sapphira, his wife, conspired to fool God. This had nothing to do with the amount of money that they gave, only that they lied about that amount. They didn't have to lie about this amount. They could have just said, hey, we want to give this. And everybody would have rejoiced and said, thank you for your generosity. And yet they tried to grieve the Holy Spirit. You can't fool God. You can't hide God. You can't do something that God's not going to know about. And so this is why Ananias and Sapphira ended up being killed, is because the Holy Spirit said, this is not how we're going to get things going. This is not how we're going to go with the church. And then the other note I wanted to give is actually jumping down, and it's just a name, okay? And it's in the conversation that the high priest and the Pharisees and the Sadducees are saying and having. And in verse 34 and 35, this Pharisee, a teacher of the law, convince the Sanhedrin to hold off and let's actually find out if this guy, if this is a real thing. If it's not, it's going to fade away. But if it's from God, we don't want to fight against God. Well, that gentleman's name is Gamaliel. Now, why is Gamaliel significant? Because he, as it says here, was a teacher of the law who was honored by all people. Well, there's a gentleman named Paul who is taught by Gamaliel and uses Gamaliel's teaching. So you're going to see a lot of wisdom come from Paul that probably came from Gamaliel as well. So that's just an interesting little aside there that I, as a nerd, just loved. So anyway, that's our conversation for today. We'll talk more tomorrow.